Welcome to Modern Farm Business Podcast. This podcast is designed to help the farm leader bring their business to the next level. We'll cover everything from leadership and finance to strategy and planning. I'm your host, Dean Hefta. A recent project of mine involved building a garden shed. Now, rather than the assemble according to instructions approach, I decided to take the old-fashioned path and build it from scratch. This means getting some basic plans together to make a good material list, and it also means a lot of measuring and a lot of cutting. Along the process, it hit me that when we're creating something new, we don't measure what we don't want. We measure what we do want. Today, we're talking about the power of measurement in our farm business, evidence of that power at work, and opportunities to take it to the next level. Now, nobody would accuse me of being a master builder. I just don't have the experience to draw from to build quickly. But I like challenges and learning along the way, so I muddle through. Along the whole process, there's a lot of measuring to do, and I found it interesting that at no point, whether I was measuring a stud or cutting a piece of plywood or getting a shingle to fit, not once did I measure how much I wanted to take off the piece. I measured how much I wanted. If I had a 96-inch 2x4 and I needed 84 inches, I didn't measure 12 inches on the 2x4 and cut that off in hopes that I'd be left with 84 inches. Nope. I measured what I wanted and I ignored what I didn't want. But in our life and our business, how often is it that our focus is on that 1 foot of the 2x4 that we don't want? I don't want lazy employees. I don't want to be overweight. I don't want to be broke. I don't want bad yields. I don't want people making mistakes. Think about it. We'd never try to build a building with only instructions on how much to take off each piece. Yet it can be so tempting to focus on our emotion around the things that we don't want. However, when we look around, there are great examples of what I'd call positive measures at work in our world. The best example is what we've been able to do in agriculture with yield. Yield is a number that every farmer focuses on. It's a top-line number that's key for farm viability. If you don't grow something, you don't have it to sell. Let's look at corn. In the 1930s, U.S. corn yield was around 30 bushels an acre. By 1960, we were over 60. By 1980, we got above 100. And in 2017, the U.S. farmer averaged over 176 bushels an acre, nearly 6 times the productivity of 90 years ago. That's proof that what we focus on grows. There's a cautionary tale, though, with these positive measures. When we overly focus on what we want, we risk tunnel vision. We become so obsessed with what we want, we lose perspective. When we focus so much on our weight and exercising, we risk anorexia. When we worry only about our retirement account, we might miss out on enjoying today. When we look only at our big yields and how big we can get them, we can forget the goal of profitability. Too often I've seen the blind pursuit of yield end up with out-of-control production costs. Too often I've seen the singular focus on the size of the farm end in bankruptcy. This is what Billy Beane of the Oakland A's understood. He recognized that too many teams were focusing their measurements too narrowly. He began looking at measurements like on-base percentage to uncover undervalued players. This approach was made famous in the book and the movie Moneyball, and it allowed one of the lowest budget teams to move from a 400 season in 1997 to a 630 in 2003, all by shifting what was being measured. As leaders, we have to recognize that we get more of what we measure. That's a simple phrase, but it carries with it a lot of burden and a lot of responsibility. When I'm measuring for my 84-inch 2x4, I also need to keep in the back of my mind what will be left over. I should be mindful to grab the 8-footer instead of the 12-footer so I reduce waste. I also need to remember that the goal, ultimately, is not the 84-inch stud, but it's building a great shed. I need to keep a picture of how all the pieces will fit together and what are the next steps ahead of me. That's the key for leadership. Here's a few tips for managing measurements on the farm. First, what is it that you ultimately want? This means taking the time to go 5, 10, 20 years into the future. It's defining success and what it means for you. And this might be a little fuzzy. This isn't a 10-minute exercise. It's more of a process of getting yourself oriented on what you want the future to look like. Then that becomes your North Star, which leads to making it easier to determine what our handful of key measurements need to be for us to get there. When you have the future you want to create, what are the few things that we need to measure so that we know we're on the right path? Those measurements might mean you determine that you have to get to a certain level of cost competitiveness. It might mean that you have to get to a certain number of acres by a certain point in time. Or maybe there's a type of culture or workforce that you need to have along the way that you want to focus on creating. The key is determining what are the key measurements that will let us know we're on the way. In building my shed, I needed to measure each board versus the plan, and I needed to measure what's level. Those were two critical measurements along the way. I needed to check in on them. If my foundation and walls aren't straight, once I'm finished, I can't go back and fix it. The third piece after identifying the critical measures is to create the system and the habits for doing the measurement. If I'm not periodically checking level, if I'm not making sure my lengths are correct, I'll be operating under an assumption that is different from reality. If I decide driving my cost per bushel down is a critical measurement, but all of my actions only focus on increasing yield per acre, then I'm operating under one belief and acting on another. So when you pick a measurement, attach to it how and when you will do the measurement. Then, when you're checking the numbers, determine what action needs to be taken, if any. Because the number isn't enough, there has to be something that we do to affect the number. I hope this has given you some tools for your tool belt as you go about building your great business. While not everything that matters can be measured, take some time to figure out what some of the few things that you can measure and act on will matter to what you're working to create. Thank you to Water Street Solutions for making Modern Farm Business Podcast possible. You can learn more farm business insights at waterstreetconsulting.com. If you have comments or questions, shoot me an email at dean@modernfarmbusiness.com. I look forward to seeing you again next week.